YouTube channel. And with that, I'd like to hand the meeting over to Jennifer Maddens to welcome us into this 24th meeting. Jennifer.
Thank you, Julie, and hello and welcome everyone to the 24th annual meeting of the Washington Group on Disability Statistics. As you can see, we're virtual again this year, and there are a lot of advantages to that, but there are also some disadvantages, and I really do miss seeing everyone in person. But it is lovely for you to join us this morning, this afternoon, this evening, and welcome. We have a very packed and I hope interesting agenda, but these meetings are way more interesting when we can get input from all of you. So really encourage you to use the chat and to, get involved in the discussions that we're having as we plan our future work. Next slide, Julie. As Julie said, we have interpretation for this meeting, in Spanish, Arabic, and French. It should be a little bit more straightforward this year than in the past, where we actually have the right labels in the Zoom world link there. But again, if you have any problem with that, let us know. Captioning is also available. We want to put a big thank you to Kalima Events, who are providing the interpretation services today. We have worked with them in the past, and we are so happy that they are willing to help us out again today. We are in extremely good hands. They are extremely expert at interpretation and also are quite knowledgeable about disability issues these days. And that really makes a big difference in terms of just getting the right word for what we're trying to convey in these discussions. Next slide, please. Just a couple of housekeeping items. We really would love if you would introduce yourself in the chat each day, the name, organization, and country. We really like to keep track of who is attending. It's easier. It's the only way really we can do this for the way that NCHS has to set up these meetings. We do put this in our annual reports back to the UN to show what kind of attendance we've had at these. This is our actual major meeting of the year. We ask you to mute your microphone when you're not speaking. And please speak slowly for the interpreter's sake. They have a really hard job, and we'd like to make their job as easy as possible. Again, please use the chat box. We really do appreciate it and invite questions and discussions, and it really does make it easier for us to move forward as we try to develop our work plan as the year progresses. And it's one of the best ways we can extract information from this meeting. Again, the meeting is being recorded, and at the end, we will make the meeting materials available on the website. But any other questions you have about anything that's been shared at the meeting, you can always contact the Secretariat. Next, please. And just a big, huge thank you to our partners at the Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development and the German Development Corporation for providing the interpretation support for this meeting. As you all know, city groups are set up by the UN, and the intent and expectation is that they will be conducted in English. Over the years, we found that this is a real barrier for participation, and since we are kind of in the business of investigating barriers and facilitators to participation, we have really tried to provide as much interpretation as we can and as we're able, and we have to rely on partners for this. And so we are very grateful to our colleagues at BMZ and GIZ for providing the interpretation support, and again for our wonderful interpreters. So thank you very much. I know I speak on behalf of our members that really rely on these interpretation services, and thank you. Next, please. I want to also thank all who have been involved in developing the agenda for this meeting and working towards developing the presentation. So The agenda was developed as usual by the Secretariat and by the Washington Group Steering Committee, who were actively involved in the preparation, and mostly with the Planning Committee. And the members of the Planning Committee were Elena De Palma, Riaza Fatima, Maria Bona, Lindsay, Neo Nigovano, Margie Schneider, Rajan Silwa, and Robert Bulma. And we are very grateful for all the work you put in developing the agenda for this meeting. We also want to thank all the moderators, presenters, and participants, some whom are not necessarily members of the Washington Group, but have agreed to meet with us today and provide their expertise on some of the issues that are important to us. And most of all, thank you all for coming to the meeting and contributing to the 24th meeting. I can't believe it's the 24th meeting of the Washington Group. It is really the membership and your support that you show at these meetings, at webinars, and other activities that really is what this group is all about. So thank you very much. And next, Julie. Yep, I think I hand it back to you.
Thank you, Jennifer. Hello again, everyone. And on behalf of the Washington Group Secretariat, Natalie Young, and myself, I would also like to welcome our members, our partners, our colleagues, our friends. Some of our past Secretariat members are here, which is really exciting. It is my pleasure to open this working meeting, as we always do, with some remarks on what has been done in the past year and our objectives of the meeting. So the objectives of the meeting are primarily to review the work that has been undertaken in the past year, but also, and importantly, to make decisions regarding the Washington Group work plan moving forward. So as a review, we'll share accomplishments. We will hear from our regional groups on their activities that they have been engaged in the past year. We'll also hear from our work groups that have been working very hard in the area of translations and the reports and developing additional questions. And then this year we have a number of sessions that are on disability data related work that our members and some of our key partners will be presenting, and I think you'll find those very interesting. And as we move through the presentations and discussions in the next 3 days, we'll determine the work plan for the next year. And it's during the 10th session, which is on day 3 of this meeting, where we will review those next steps in more detail. And as Jennifer said, your participation during the meeting helps us craft what those next directions will be. And in fact, we'll have some polls along the way to ask questions of you and to get your input and your vote on some of those decisions. We're certainly open to hearing from you in follow-up email as well. So please let us know, and if not here, in the future, your thoughts on what the Washington Group is doing. So with that, our meeting structure this year is very similar to our recent annual meetings. Most sessions will be all together here in plenary with the updates from the various groups that I just mentioned. Tomorrow on day 2, we will have a breakout session where we will adjourn to separate meeting rooms. The idea here is to conduct smaller group discussions around issues related to disability that are more focused in a particular region or area. And those rooms are designated here on the slide. I will come back to this with more information about how this works. But there are 2 additional rooms. There's one for European countries, and there is one for the non-affiliated countries and our partner organizations and colleagues. So whichever group that you currently are a member of or are most affiliated with, if during that time you can break out to that group and we will be having smaller discussions. We've received feedback in the past that suggests these sessions have been quite successful, and they really do allow for greater connection among countries and specific regions. When we come back on day 3, we'll have a brief presentation from each rapporteur of those breakout rooms. And so we'll get caught up on those things, those conversations that happened in the breakout. As Jennifer said, we have a very full agenda to cover. There will be 10 sessions in total over the next 3 days. And as we have done in the past, we will hold a separate meeting in the future for some of the countries whose time zones make attendance here right now very difficult. And that meeting will have a shorter agenda, but that will be set up. Usually we have a date already set by now, but we have not done that on purposefully this year, but we will send out information about that. Let's review the agenda briefly for the next couple of days. Today, we will have 3 sessions. And you might notice in the agenda, we have introduced some breaks. So we took your feedback that 3 hours is way too long to sit and listen to us. So we do have a few short breaks interspersed. When we come back into session after this Secretariat update, we'll go into a session where we'll hear updates from the Mental Health and Psychosocial Functioning Work Group. Elena De Palma and Margie Schneider will provide an update on the work that they have accomplished this past year to advance development of those additional questions in this domain. In addition to a poll being introduced in this session that we are in now, there will also be a poll at the end of the mental health session. So please participate in that. Our third session today, we have the honor to welcome Sarah Malalou from the German Development Corporation. She will be providing an update on the planning for next year's Global Disability Summit. That will happen in April in Berlin, and many of you have been asking about the Global Disability Summit, and we are very grateful for Sarah to come to provide details and answer your questions. So if you do have questions about the summit, get those ready because there will be some time for discussion during that session. And then we'll close for day 1. On day 2, we start with what is expected to be a very interesting panel session on the topic of disability data needs in emergency situations. Ulrika Last from Humanity Inclusion will moderate and lead that session, and we are grateful to her for pulling in a number of panelists who have rich experience in these situations and who will be sharing what is needed and what considerations there are in relation to disability data needs. We'll take a short break, and then in our 5th session, we will be joined by our close partner and friend, Claudia Kappa from UNICEF, with whom we have worked for many years to develop additional tools for collecting data on children with disabilities, especially in educational settings. A highlight of this year for the Washington Group was the completion and the launch of the teacher version of the child functioning module and a second tool, the inclusive education module. And Claudia will be sharing with you more information on both of those tools. And after that, on day 2, we'll go to those breakout rooms. And as I mentioned, we'll discuss in more detail how those will work for those who did not participate last year. On day 3, we'll have this regional disability group report out from the rapporteurs. And then in session 8, we are going to be joined by our longtime Washington Group member, Dan Mont, who will be presenting on a topic about which the Secretariat receives many questions. And that is, why do disability estimates vary, either across countries or even within a country across data collections? So we've asked Dan to come and address some of the reasons for those differences. We'll take a short break, and then in session 9, we will hear country experience updates from both Kenya and the Maldives. That session includes our members from both of those national statistical offices, as well as a special guest from the UN Development Program. And lastly, in our final session, we'll be focusing on our meeting accomplishments and next steps. And again, we will have a number of polls here to get your input on those next steps. So turning to the actual Secretariat updates and accomplishments since WG23, we always start out with this slide, which, as Jennifer mentioned, it's pretty impressive, 24 meetings so far. And we are certainly a well-traveled group, but this year marks our 5th year of holding this meeting virtually. And this may be something we might want to talk about in our final session in terms of what members' preferences are for the next year and how to go about planning for the 25th meeting. We like to show our maps. This one shows coverage of membership in the Washington group, which remains high. We are at about 164 countries at this point. I do want to mention that we are delayed, but we will be sending out our membership letters this in the next several months. And so that number may change, but for the most part, the Washington group has always enjoyed a fairly high level of membership. The Secretariat has been quite active this year in a number of other ways, and we always try to share some of those highlights with you. This slide shows some of the meetings that the Secretariat attends on a regular basis. As always, we are responsible for submitting a formal report to the Commission on behalf of the membership. That submission was combined with the submissions of other international agencies on disability statistics, and it was added, that document was added as an information item, a joint report of the Secretary General, and that can actually be accessed on the Commission's website, or we can provide that to the membership as you prefer. We certainly have also participated in other UN city groups, the Titchfield Group, the Praia Group, and as many of you know, we also attend all of the GLAD meetings and some of their subcommittee meetings, the inclusive education, the inclusive health, and now the early childhood care and education subgroup is one that we regularly attend so that the Washington group is represented there. I think I skipped over COSP, that bullet. COSP, the Conference of State Parties to the convention, is always a busy meeting for the Secretariat. We always go and represent the Washington group and have for a number of years. We're often asked to give presentations or participate in side events, or even just have bilateral meetings with country representatives. So this past year, some of those meetings and sessions are listed here, as well as some of the countries with whom we did have discussions. Natalie Young and I covered COSP this year. Many of the topics are those that we ourselves interact and with one another on and think about: inclusive education, humanitarian contexts, mainstreaming disability data collection, and monitoring of the SDGs, and the rich conversations. So as an invitation, if you or your colleagues are planning to attend COSP this June in 2025, please let us know. We would very much like to connect with you in person, and also include you in these meetings that we are having, because people have a lot of questions about how to use the tools and where they're being used, and you have experience in that as well. So if you're in New York in June, let us know. We'd really like to connect. On this slide, are some meetings and reports where the Secretariat has either participated or made some kind of contribution. There has been much activity around and interest in the new tools. UNICEF and the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade hosted at COSP a side event to launch the new tools, and there have been several webinars that were held thereafter. The Secretariat was also invited to speak at a session of the Subcommittee on Human Rights of the Canadian Parliament. That subcommittee meeting was focused on inclusive education, and in particular, inclusion of children with intellectual and developmental disabilities. We contributed to the UN 2024 Disability and Development Report, and most recently, we participated in the ESQA organized third regional workshop held for Arab countries. And that presentation focused largely on what is the Washington Group, but also our country disability report activity. More about that in this session. We always interact and collaborate with many of the UN entities. This year is no different. These are some of those agencies here. It's not exhaustive. For example, we know that you yourselves interact with a number of these agencies, and in fact, UN Women has been a great supporter this year, especially around the work of the regional groups in Africa, but also in the psychosocial work group. So we thank them for that and appreciate our relationships there. As you know, the Secretariat also frequently receives questions and requests for technical assistance, or simply requests for meetings to make connections. Jennifer always says we're a great gatekeeper, liaison. We put people together. And so many of those requests are of that nature as well. Some of these requests come from our members or their colleagues within national statistical offices, as well as other organizations. And we have interacted with many of you in the past year, often around those country disability report that are ongoing. So here you see some of the diversity of the countries with whom we've interacted and a few examples of other entities. We also receive requests for information and technical assistance from a variety of other organizations. Many of these requests are handled by email, so we're not necessarily having active meetings with everyone, but they do come into the Washington Group mailbox, or they come through the website query system. And some of these, like I said, are easy to handle, and others, we have several interactions or meetings to provide whatever support that we can. And finally, over the next two slides, we always try to give you a sense of what requests for translations are coming in, because those are always so frequent. Here are some of the languages as well as the organizations that make those requests. It gives us some sense of where work to collect data on disability might be happening outside of national statistical offices. Here's a continuation of that list. In many instances, the Secretariat does not have the translation, not all, but in many. And other times, as you all know, we've talked about this on several occasions, the translation may have been attained quite some time ago. But in most cases, we can't assess the quality of those. And of course, this is related to the work that the translation work group is doing, and we will talk more about this. Finally, this slide and the next two slides contain a number of reports and guidance resources where the Washington Group tools have been used in producing the data either disseminated in the report, or they are reports that endorse the use of the tools, and some of these are guidance documents. And all of these are links so that when we do share the slides, you can click on the link to share those. The thing I want to mention about these reports is we only know the ones that come to our attention. I'm going to move to the next slide so you can take a look at the other reports that we have found. In general, I would say if you know of a report that has been produced, please send us the link or bring it to our attention so we can add this to our library, knowing that we don't come across everything on our own. So it would be really helpful to have that information. Countries are beginning to disseminate some of their information that they've collected, especially through their census round. And then we have a couple of best practices and training items that have come to our attention, and we're making those links available to you as well. As I said, I'm sure these lists omit many reports and dissemination products. So I invite you to drop into the chat, for example, any titles or links for products that we might not know about. The annual survey that goes out to members that asks you whether you are using the tools and how are you using the tools and what are your intentions always result in the following couple of slides, which are kind of fun to look at. This year we had 56 countries thus far to date as of yesterday provide to us the annual survey. And this gives you some sense of what countries have thus far responded to that request. If you are in a country, statistical office that hasn't been able to provide a survey yet, we invite you to continue to consider to do that. We will take those and include those in our commission report, as we always do. Where in the world is the Washington Group short set on functioning now? We certainly see that number creeping up. We're at 125 countries that have reported use of the short set, of those who have answered over the years. And then a number of countries are already reporting use of the tools, not just the short set, but the other tools as well, including the child functioning module in 2025 and beyond. So we've highlighted those countries for you. And finally, in that survey, we always ask a couple of other questions about your activities. We ask about standalone disability surveys and whether your country is conducting one or has conducted one. We have 13 countries reporting that they have conducted a standalone disability survey in the past. 3 have reported that they will do so in the future. We have 26 countries saying that they are including the questions in a disability module within a survey that is already being administered or planned. And then another 21 who will include a disability module in a survey in the future. And then quite a number of countries include disability in some form in their administrative data collections. So at this point, in the Secretariat update, I'm going to turn this back over to Jennifer, who will give us an update on some of the support that we are receiving from GIZ and the purpose of that. And she will also talk a little bit about the work that is being done in the translation work group. After Jennifer, she'll turn that over to Natalie, who will talk about, or who will provide, excuse me, an update from the data dissemination work group. So Jennifer, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you.
There you go.
Thanks so much. Another little quirk of the way the UN set up city groups is they don't provide any kind of support for them, any kind of financial support, any kind of other kind of support either. And in order to best do our work, the Washington Group has always felt a need to try to get some external support for things like interpretation, website, meetings, and providing technical assistance. And we have been very grateful to the whoops. I don't know what just happened. Okay. The Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ and GIZ in Germany, for providing some financial support to the Washington Group over the past several years. I mentioned that it's that support that's allowed us to do the interpretation for this meeting and for some of last meetings as well. But mostly that support has gone to two of our regional disability statistics groups, and these are the two that are in Africa. Several years ago, we decided that one of the better ways to provide technical assistance and develop expertise in the collection of and analysis of disability data was to work at the regional level as well as the global level. And as you know, we will meet tomorrow, set up a set of regional groups run by regional representatives that would address the specific issues in their region. And the two in Africa are the Brazzaville group, mostly for French-speaking countries, and the Southern and Eastern African group. And GIZ has been providing the support for those groups over the past several years. The grants are administered by our friends at UCL, and we're very grateful for all their support. The first grant ran from 15 September to 2021 until 30 June 2023. The second picked up after that in August of 2023 and will end in July of 2025. And we also have an extension now starting this September that would also go through June 2025. And this money has supported in-person meetings in the region and a series of other activities, and is supporting the creation of the analytic reports that you'll hear about before. And we are very, very grateful to BMZ and GIZ for providing the assistance to the Washington Group and to these regional groups, and it is greatly appreciated. And we a shout out to Sarah, who you'll hear from later, who has been our primary contact and who's just been wonderful to work with. So thank you, Sarah. Next slide, please. Okay, now I want to just give an update on the translation work group, and we have made progress after a little bit of a hiccup. We have made progress towards the adoption of the new translation protocol that was adopted at past Washington Group meetings. And as you could see from Julie's slides, the Secretariat still gets a lot of requests for translated questionnaires, and also gets information from organizations that have done the translation. And the way we have been working with that is we have a compilation of all the translations, and anyone asks for one, we send it out to them with the note that we cannot and have not evaluated the quality of those. The only ones that are available on the website are what we had referred to as the kind of the accepted translations, and those you can just download. We revisited that policy, decided that we weren't even so sure that the ones we were saying were the accepted ones had been fully evaluated, and decided to take another approach, which would be to make all translations available on the website, but with accompanying information as we had it about who did the translation and how it was done. So once we adopted that new protocol, what we needed to do was create this database of translations, and the first step was to identify what data items, what metadata we needed for to obtain for each of the translations, so that any user could look at that information and determine whether they wanted to use that translation, whether there was enough quality metrics for their purpose. Next slide, Julie. So in order to move forward and do that, we created a small group to develop the items to be included in this database. A draft of the item was developed by the Secretariat, was shared by the group members. All members have not yet responded. Please do. But the response we did receive, thank you, Elena, was positive, and those comments have been incorporated into the proposal. And the proposed items are on the next slide. This first group really are pretty straightforward. Who's submitting it, who did it, what's the date, which question set does it apply to? Because remember, there are many, and we have translations of some of these, not all yet. What language, hopefully with a drop down, who did it, and the date. And this should be fairly straightforward and not too difficult to collect. Next slide, please. Where we might have somewhat more problems are for some of these issues. One, what are the qualifications of the person doing the translation? For some of the old translations, this information might not be available anymore, and it may never have been available. We would like to get information about the methodology used. Again, a simple drop-down might be useful here, but we also, if none of those apply, we would have to get information about any other of the methods that might have been used. Love to find out if it was cognitively tested, and if it was tested, we would want to get a link to all of those test results or some kind of documentation. And it would be useful to know about where this translation had been used, what country, what year, and what kind of data set. For example, is it being used in some country census where they have determined that it's appropriate and the translation was done appropriately, and as many links as possible to information about that. Here, the information might be a lot spottier, just may not be available, and it will be harder for people to provide that for us. But this is the list, and this is, we would like as much input as possible on this list. What have we left out? What do you think is not necessary? We would like to reduce burden on anyone putting forward a translation, but we also want to provide enough information to the user so that they can determine whether or not this translation is sufficient quality for their use. Next slide. So some of the things to keep in mind, we really do need a separate entry for each translation of each questionnaire. There may be multiple from the same organization. It would be nice if we could find a way where they didn't have to input the same information over and over again, but we will need to worry about that. Again, while we'd love to get everything that we were asking for, we need to realize that we won't. And at some point, we will have to make a decision about whether to include a translation that we really know nothing about, And be upfront and say it's really up to the user whether or not you want to take this translation on. And again, we want to make this as easy as possible for people to fill out with drop downs and formats. So it's quite straightforward. But this also presents a challenge. Many of us, particularly me, are not very good at creating databases and spreadsheets and any kind of data entry document. We need to create something that will be easy for the people providing the translations to fill out, but then that we can easily translate into some kind of database that we can put on the website that will have a front end that will make it easy for people to find the translations they're interested in and the information about them. We will have to work with our web provider on some of these steps, but some of them will probably have to take on our own. And so we are really need to have the assistance of all you out there where this is not a heavy lift for you, or some other suggestion about how we can make this happen. I don't think this is, for people who know how to do this is probably not very difficult. For people who don't know how to do it, it's quite difficult. So we need to figure out a way forward on that. Next slide, please. So moving forward, we really welcome input from all of you on these lists of items, and just contact the secretariat. We'll send you the document that has the list, and you can provide comments on that. We'd love to have new members to the work group, especially members who are good at creating databases and forms and other of the kind of nitty-gritty of how we actually make this new protocol a reality, which I truly think will make it much easier for those requesting translations. It'll be much faster, and we'll be able to provide a lot more information. So please contact me or the Secretariat about your interest in working with this. I think if we can get a critical mass, we can probably get this done and finalized by next year's the 25th meeting, which will be a very nice accomplishment to report there. So I think I'm going to turn this over to Natalie now. If I'm not mistaken.
Yes. This is Julie. Let me just pop in and say, remind people that we do capture the chat. And so if there's anything about the translation work that you would like to weigh in on, especially that list of information items that Jennifer just shared, is it missing something? Do you have, thoughts about that? Please share those in the chat and so that we can collect those. Thank you. Over to you, Natalie.
Great. Thanks so much, Julie. Okay. Next slide, please. All right. So I'm going to be providing an update on the Washington Group country disability reports. Next slide, please. A couple of key decisions came out of the 2019 annual meeting of the Washington Group. So back in 2019, there was a discussion about the role of the Washington Group in the dissemination of data. And there was broad consensus that the Washington Group mandate does include dissemination of data. We're now at a place where we have quite a bit of data that are collected around the world using the very same question set, the Washington Group short set, which led to the question, how can we, as the Washington Group, help disseminate these data? The decision of the membership at that 2019 meeting was to disseminate the data via a standard country report on disability. These reports aim to present basic information on disability prevalence, as well as disaggregation of key indicators, such as employment, by disability in a standardized way. The reports should be short. They were, when initially discussed, the aim was for reports that would be about 2 to 4 pages in length. These reports would also use standard language and a standard set of figures, while also allowing countries to add their own country-specific analyses and figures. particularly when disaggregating indicators by disability. Next slide, please. In 2024, the Secretariat has engaged in a number of activities to support the production of these reports. And that's what I want to update you all on today. The support that we've provided in 2024 includes a webinar series. The Secretariat hosted a couple of webinars that focused on these country disability reports. The first webinar, which was entitled Introduction to Creating a Country Report on Disability, took place on the 27th of June, and as the title suggests, introduced member countries to the purpose of these reports, as well as how to go about creating your own report. We also included some frequently asked questions in that session. And if you happen to miss it and are interested in learning more, we do have a recording of that webinar available on YouTube at the link displayed on this slide. In July, the Secretariat hosted a second webinar. The second webinar was an opportunity for member countries to ask questions about the preparation of these reports. And that webinar took place on 2 different dates, the 2nd of July and the 11th of July. Countries were welcome to attend both of the webinars or just one of the webinars, and they were really an open forum where countries could ask questions and we would provide responses. Overall, these webinars on country disability reports were attended by over 80 countries and helped spur an interest in and commitment to producing country disability reports on the part of many attendees. Next slide, please. Another way the Secretariat has supported production of these standard country disability reports is through the provision of technical assistance. This has been provided via those webinars, but also through one-on-one meetings with national statistical offices and email correspondence with statisticians from NSOs. And we do continue to welcome our members to contact the Secretariat and/or our colleague Dan Mott to request personalized technical assistance for preparing these reports. Next slide, please. We've also developed a number of guidance documents to assist countries in producing their own country disability reports. And that includes the 4 documents on this screen. So we have a general guidance document for creating a Washington Group country disability report, as well as a document for how to construct that key disability indicator using the Washington Group short set. We also provided countries with a sample short report based on data from the US. And we also had a guidance document for best practices for age adjusting disability data, since age adjustment is an important component of these reports. Next slide, please. And in 2024, we also released new guidance documents. 3 of the guidance documents on this screen aim to support national statistical offices in age adjusting their estimates for these reports. So for example, we came up with SAS and Stata syntax that could be used to age adjust disability estimates to create all of the figures in the report that required age adjustment. In addition to the age adjustment guidance documents, we also released a guidance document that was a list of frequently asked questions, some of which we gathered through those webinars. And of course, we provided our answers to those frequently asked questions. If you haven't received a copy of these guidance documents and you're interested in preparing a report or are currently working on a report, please do not hesitate to email the Washington Group Secretariat. We would be happy to provide those documents to you. Next slide, please. The other activity related to the country disability reports that the Secretariat has undertaken in 2024 is the review of draft reports. To date, we've received reports from 8 countries: Brazil, Burkina Faso, Hungary, Kenya, Malawi, the Maldives, Mali, and the United States. So that represents a broad swath of the world. And we're working with each of these countries to revise the reports where needed. In some cases, we've already finalized the reports from some of these countries. There are also 2 regional groups, Washington Group regional groups in Africa, that have been helping support the development of reports in Southern and Eastern Africa and Francophone Africa. So that would be the Southern and Eastern Africa Regional Disability Statistics Group. And then we also have the Brazzaville Group on Disability Statistics. And both of those groups have been organizing in-person meetings as one way to help member countries in their regions develop these reports. Next slide, please. We should note that along the way, there have been some unanticipated challenges. First, when the data dissemination work group developed the key criteria, the key standards for these reports, it was agreed that it would be critical for the reports to age adjust estimates of disability prevalence, since age structures vary a lot across countries and disability has a strong association with age. So to make comparable estimates, we need to age adjust for these reports. However, we did not realize that many national statistical agencies do not age adjust their disability estimates as standard practice. So this meant that we needed to create additional guidance documents to help countries with age adjustment. Second, we found that there was less consistency across countries in how standard indicators are defined than we had initially anticipated. So for example, in the United States sample report, we used particular categories for educational attainment, but not all countries use those same categories for educational attainment, which creates challenges in the design of comparable reports. It also meant we needed to provide clear guidance on how countries should proceed if one of their indicators differed somewhat from the indicator in the sample US report. An additional challenge had to do with sources of data. We were working from a model where all the measures needed to produce the report were available in a single nationally representative census or survey. So the measure of disability, the measure of age, sex, employment, educational attainment, family income, all would be available in one data source. However, a number of countries informed us that not all measures needed for the report were always available in a single data source, which raised challenges again in how to design comparable reports. We also encountered a number of formatting challenges, particularly since different countries have different technical abilities and preferences when formatting their reports. For example, we didn't anticipate that some countries would want to add logos to the title page of the report, and there was also variation in what countries wanted to include in the report. Some countries included the required text and figures alone, which resulted in a short, succinct report, while others added many additional figures and extra text, resulting in much longer reports. So we tried to develop an approach that would allow countries to include all the information they desired, but in a format that would preserve the structure of the standard format. Finally, another issue that arose was the discrepancy between estimates published on a country's official website and estimates published in their Washington Group standard country report, particularly if they were doing age adjustment for the report, but that was not standard practice in their statistical office. These differences could lead to confusion on the part of the public. The public might ask, why is the disability estimate on the NSO's website higher or lower than the estimate in the Washington Group Standard Country Report? So our solution here has been to assure countries that we will include a note on the website where we store the Washington Group disability reports that addresses these potential discrepancies. Next slide, please. Okay, so we've summarized the Secretariat's activities to support the production of country disability reports in 2024. But at this point, what we want to do is to hear more from all of you in terms of your National Statistical Office's activities related to these reports. To that end, I'm going to launch a poll momentarily that will ask you for a status update. So this poll is going to ask 2 questions, which are displayed on the screen here. And I will go ahead and launch that poll. Okay, so you should see a pop-up appear on your screen, and you'll see that there are 2 questions. Please note you may need to scroll down on the pop-up screen in order to view both of the questions. You might also see that a response option is cut off for example, for question 1. All you need to do to see the full response option is to expand the size of that pop-up screen, which you can do by dragging the screen to the right. All right, so the first question is going to ask you about the status of your country disability report. Has your country A, completed its country disability report? 2, started a country disability report? 3, is able to produce a country disability report but has not yet started? Or C, cannot develop a country disability report? And you'll see that there's also a follow-up question that we ask all of you to answer, which is just in the event that we wanted to contact you to learn more about your country disability report, can you please provide your name, email address, and organization name? Now, we're not planning to hound all of you and email you constantly asking about your country disability reports, but this information would be helpful to us. All right, so I'm going to give you all a few more minutes to respond to the poll. And just make sure that after you answer the questions, you do hit submit. I'm seeing answers coming in as we speak.
Natalie, if I may add, I'm going to answer a question that came into the chat while people are answering the poll. Someone wanted to know if we would send around the titles and links for those reports that were highlighted in the Secretariat update. During the break, what I will do is I will drop into the chat the reports and their links so that you have them more immediately. But if you want them via email, please send us an email and we're happy to share those in that manner as well. I'd also like to invite members, if you have a report that you know of or that you've helped produce in your country, it would be very helpful if you could drop into the chat that information, if not now, then later on today or at any time over the next 3 days so that we can capture that and add it to our list.
Great.
Thank you.
So I'm still seeing responses coming in. I wonder if we want to stay on this slide or we could advance. Yeah, we could advance the slide deck and go to break. So before we go to a short break, we do want to thank everyone who has been contributing to this meeting and participating in it. And we're going to have a 15-minute break. In the meantime, I'm going to leave this poll open until I see until I see responses stop trickling in. So if you haven't had a chance to respond yet, we please encourage you to do so. Thank you so much.
So it's 1:30 here in Washington, D.C. It is 9:30. We will reconvene in 15 minutes at 1/4 and we will open with the mental health and psychosocial functioning work group update. Thank you.
Tack ska jag.
Tää se on Gamerverse internet. Der er bare noget galt med vores internet. Ja, for den bliver ved med at hoppe ud. Jeg siger, der ikke er noget nyt. Ja, så er det ikke. Også fordi det virker jo. Men så lige pludselig var jeg lige i gang med at skrive mail, ikke? Så er den bare lige forsvundet. Ja. Som det virker.
Everyone, welcome back. Natalie, take it away.
All right. Yes, welcome back all. Some of you have been noting in the chat that you were not able to submit your response to the poll questions before the poll was closed. Unfortunately, I cannot relaunch the poll, but please enter your answers to the status update in the meeting chat, or you can send us an email, or you can even direct message us in the chat. You can direct message me, Natalie Young, and we'll be very grateful. Okay, so with that said, I want to take this time to introduce the next session. So our second session today is mental health and psychosocial functioning. This is an update from the work group working on this topic, the co-chairs of which are Margaret Schneider and Elena De Palma. Elena is a longtime member of the Washington Group and is at the National Statistical Office in Italy. Margie is also a longtime member of the Washington Group and was formerly at the National Statistical Office in South Africa. They will be providing a status update on the development of additional questions on psychosocial functioning. They will also share analyses and conclusions from 4 cognitive testing studies that have been completed so far, as well as next steps for the work group. I should mention that this session will also have a poll at the end. Margie and Elena, please just let me know when you want me to launch that poll. I'll let you take the lead in explaining, the contents of the poll, but just let me know when you want me to hit launch. At this point, I'm going to turn things over to Margie and Elena. Thank you so much.
Hi. So thank you very much. Are you going to move on this slide, Natalie? Right. Okay. So what I'm going to do is to describe the main activities that the working group has conducted so far in developing measures that will include people with with psychosocial disabilities into the official disability statistics. Next slide, please. Some of you already is well informed about the activity carried out by this working group, but the other are new to this meeting. So let me recap a little bit about all what's done so far. The Mental Health and Psychosocial Functioning Work Group was established in 2013 at the 13th Washington Group meeting. And at that time, it was very clear that people with a psychosocial disability in some part were already captured with some of the questions of the Washington Group, because this type of disability can itself manifest itself in functional difficulties in several domains, such as cognition, communication, self-care. And these people can also in some way captured by the affect question on depression and anxiety. Nevertheless, the number of people captured through this question is limited. And therefore, it was very clear that it was necessary to find a new question, to develop a new question to be added to the Washington Group tools in order to capture people with a psychosocial disability. And the questions were developed following two main criteria. First of all, to use the difficulty in functioning approach for the measurement, and the second one, use a criterion of parsimony. The idea was to develop a minimum set of questions for population survey, so this can facilitate the inclusion on surveys while the world. Next slide. So the first things that was done by the working group was to identify a typical domain of activity limitation for people with psychosocial disabilities. And this was conducting through a literature review. We review more than 100 articles in order to identify a domain that could be also measured in population survey, where people with psychosocial disability have difficulties. And the result of this literature review highlight that the most common activity limitation were in self-care, interpersonal interactions, communication, remembering and thinking, controlling behavior, and mobility. As you are familiar with the short set as well the extending set of the Washington Group, you can see that there are two main areas that are not yet covered by the Washington Group tools: interpersonal interaction and controlling behavior. Therefore, the group decided to work on developing questions on this specific sector areas. Next slide, please. So it was necessary to conduct another review, this time focus on survey tools as well as clinical tools, in order to identify some possible questions to be considered for the inclusion in the Washington Group tools. And of course, the group decided some criteria to be followed in the selection of the question. Besides to be focused on basic activity limitation, reflecting difficulty in interpersonal interaction and controlling behavior and emotion, it was decided that it was very important to find questions that were conceptually clarity, questions that have a very simple wording and response option, maybe with a similar structure to the Washington Group question, in order to so that the adaptation to the format of the Washington Group question was not changed substantially the question itself. Question should be suitable for self-reporting and proxy reporting, relevant for adults, as we already have the child functioning module that cover also these difficulties for children. Question with no reference to environmental context and that should be culturally sensitive and appropriate, as they must be used across the world, and easy to translate. So the survey, the review of survey and clinical tools lead us to single out 7 questions that the next slide will show to you. So the format of the question is the same for the other question in the Washington Group tools. Do you have difficulty in, and here there are the the 7 area investigated by this question. As you can see, they refer all to the ICF domains chapter 7. Interpersonal interaction and relationship, and focus on the 2 subgroup, general interpersonal interaction and particular interpersonal relationship. Not all the domain, of course, are covered, but the most important or feasible to be measured in survey population are included. And then when we add all these questions, 7 questions, then we need to start to the validation process. As you can see in the next slide, the validation process is include, as usually, cognitive testing and field testing. Right now, we are in the cognitive testing phase. And we carry out several activities to be able to conduct a cognitive test. First of all, it was prepared a training package because it was, we consider that there is a different level of expertise in applying the cognitive test method. And it was important to support the National Statistical Office in this work. Then there was prepared a testing protocol that was also adapted to the different level of expertise of the National Statistics in conducting a cognitive test. And finally, we conduct 4 cognitive tests, starting from South Africa in 2019, and Costa Rica, Hungary, and Kenya. Right now, we are analyzing the data from all the 4 cognitive tests, and Marie will present the overall result of this activity. Let me provide some basic information about the training package. The next slide, please. The training package that, as I told you, was planned and designed to support the National Statistical Office or any other organization that would like to be involved in the cognitive test, is right now available in 2 different formats, as e-learning with the support of several virtual meetings, or in person with the support of other virtual meetings. The main goal is to provide a full understanding of the cognitive test method, but also to provide skills, so practical skills in how to conduct a cognitive interviews, how to upload information in the Keynotes, that is a software free of charge, specific design for conducting analysis on the information collected through cognitive interviewing. And also the training provide skills for data analysis and how to drafting a final results report. Right now, there are 9 lessons that are done by reading materials, slides, and videos, and there is also several, let's say, homework activities Let me say that the training package can be adapted to the different level of expertise as well as other need specific for each country. Next slide. The cognitive test is an in-depth semi-structured interview that is used to assess how well survey questions perform when are asked of a respondent. So the main goal is to understand, to verify, let's say in this way, whether respondents understand the question according to their intended meaning when developed, and if the respondent can provide accurate answer based on the intent. It is also used, and this is the case, to evaluate cross-cultural equivalence of the questions, as these questions are going to be used across the world, and is able also to capture any errors that occurred during the translation process, because all these may have impact in data quality. So the general goal is to analyze the performance of the proposed question and their ability to count in people with a psychosocial disability, in order to be able to select a minimum set of questions that can be included in the Washington Group tools, questions that are culturally sensitive and appropriate. Let's move to the next one, where I think that here is some few information about the testing protocol. That is the tools that guide the interview. And it includes background information, socio-demographic and mental health condition, because the sample of people that are attending the cognitive interview are people with already know mental health condition, and people that we do not have any, if they have any mental health condition, because we need to compare the results and to see how this question works for one group and for the other group. So background information, a few questions about functioning difficulties that include the 6 questions of the short set and the 2 questions about, let's say, the 4 questions about affect, question on depression and anxiety, and then 7 questions on psychosocial disability. Of course, the number of these questions will change in the future, as the result of the cognitive test conducted so far already provides some indication that we can change, drop, or unified question, but you will hear more later from Marky. There are also probe questions that are the question used to collect information from the respondents in order to understand what they were thinking about and how they reach the answer that they provide. And a few other questions to support the analysis. The sample is presented in the next slide, and we have this is about that, of course, doing one cognitive test after the other one, we already make a small change in the 7 questions, and these are some examples. So we slightly change the wording. In one case, we move from one answer categories to another one, because in the beginning, the question about controlling behavior have the different kind of answer categories, but we decided that it has been much better to use the usual answer categories of the Washington Group tools. The other thing was that we changed the order of the question to see if there were some affect on this in the respondents. And the cognitive interview administration, that is the testing protocol, was, as I already told you, a slightly change based on the experience of the participant. The next slide should be about, yes, it is, about the sample. As you can see, we have a total of 106 cognitive interviews conducted so far, with 62 people with a mental health condition that could be different types, such as depression, but psychosis, schizophrenia. In few cases, there were also comorbidity, and in some cases, there were people also with cognition difficulties. 44 are the interview conducted with the people without a mental health condition. The 7 questions were tested in English, Spanish, Swahili, and Hungarian. Regarding the demographic information about the respondents, there were more prevalence of women than men, and the majority of people interviewed were in the age between 30 and 49. Regarding education level, we have some, let's say, something that we need to correct in some way in the next cognitive test, as the majority have really secondary or higher education. And more or less, there was almost half were employed and half were not employed. Before to give the floor to Margie, let me provide some basic information about how the data collected during the cognitive interview were used in the analysis. Next slide. So in the analysis, we use qualitative data as well as quantitative data. Quantitative data are the answer provided about the level of difficulty to each of the 7 questions. And these have been used to determine the number of respondents with a mental health condition identified by the psychosocial question versus the affect questions. Also, very important was to see if the same person was identified by both set of questions or not. Quantitative data have been also used to see if the mental health people with a mental health condition show a typical response profile, and if these are different from people without a mental health condition. While qualitative data, next slide, are the focus of the analysis in order to understand, to capture the different patterns of interpretation in order to determine if the question were understood and interpreted as intended or not. So if the interpretation of the question and the answer provided was in scope or out of scope. And the other aspect that was considered is the congruency between the response given in the narrative and the level of difficulty that was indicated by the respondent. This kind of analysis, especially pattern of interpretation, is done across all the respondents in each country to see how they change and to see if there is really big difference between people with and without mental health. Other information were collected were about difficulty that respondents may have in understanding the question related to the necessity to have the question repeated or have difficulty in using the answer categories or they need clarification for some terms. All these kind of analysis have been used and you will hear about that more. I believe that I have another one that is next one is, you know, it's not, it doesn't want to be a personal question, but we are ready to launch, so you can click again, Natalie. We are really ready to launch the new round of cognitive test. Click again, and then for this reason, we are looking for other countries or international organizations that really would like to be involved in this important process. So here there is only a list of basic information about what is needed to do in carry out a cognitive test. So the country needs to select the interviewer, the interviewers need to attend a training course. The country needs to identify a purposive sample, let's say about 20 or more, if it's possible, interviews, conduct the interviews after translating the testing protocol, and upload the information in this ad hoc software. Then conduct the analysis and write the report. As you can see, the last two are not in bold because we can together discuss how to carry out this part. So this is all for me. I think that let me stress that, as you can see, 10 years have already gone by, and we are in this critical situation. We need to move on. It's extremely important to move on, but to do that, we really need your support and your help, because we need to conduct other cognitive tests as well, start to try to conduct some field tests. What we plan for the future, and is the next slide, is that we want to finalize the analysis for the 4 cognitive tests already conducted. We are engaging countries to take part of this activity, and discussions are going on with the National Statistical Office of Saudi Arabia, with the Jordan Higher Council for the Right of People with Disability. There are a lot of discussion in Nigeria, in Malawi. And Botswana was very keen to include some of the question of psychosocial disability, in a multi-topic survey. But again, due to limited space, they were able to include only affect question, but we will see in the future what we can do. If anyone is interested, please contact us, as we can customize the training cognitive package, and we can organize everything based on the needs and the time available. So, Margie, I believe that is your turn. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Elena, for giving that good background. So what I'm going to do is give an overview of the analysis of these 4 cognitive tests, and also highlight some of the proposed changes that we would like to make to the questions for the next cognitive tests. Next slide. So the analysis really looks at what are the problems with the questions, the needs for clarification, repetitions, or difficulty with the response options, or any other issues. Secondly, looking at the interpretations of in and out of scope interpretation space compared to what the intended interpretation of the question is. And then looking at the performance of the affect and psychosocial functioning questions together to make sure, as Elena said, that we are counting in people with psychosocial disability. And also a related question is, are we counting in too many people without a psychosocial disability into the statistics, which may be a problem. Next slide. So this is just to remind you of the criteria that we're using. And whenever you see MHC, it means mental health condition. And as Elena explained, we had a group always of people with a known mental health, with diagnosed mental health condition, and a group of people without a mental health condition. Although there were sometimes people who felt that they did have a mental health condition, but it hadn't been diagnosed. So for the affect questions, we use the recommended cutoff points from the Washington Group extended set recommendations. And for the psychosocial functioning questions being tested, we used a lot of difficulty or cannot do it all, as for the other, the short set, etc. And for the affect questions, we use, this is the cutoff. So if somebody had daily feelings, but when they had those feelings, it was only a little, that would be low. But if it was daily feelings and it was when they had those feelings, it was a lot, that would be high. So we then categorize that. This is on the Washington Group website, the recommended analysis for the affect question. Next slide. Just to remind you of the overall sample, and somebody asked in the chat, how did we get 62 people with a known mental health or diagnosed mental health condition? We worked through local organizations. We, in Kenya, the Human Rights Commission worked with local organizations, bringing together people with psychosocial disability. And in South Africa, we used a halfway house that we went and talked to. And certainly my experience in South Africa was a very welcoming attitude from people with psychosocial disability who really wanted to be part of it. Also to just remember that when we do the field testing or we use the questions in a survey, we won't know what the person's mental health status is before asking the questions. It's only for the cognitive testing that we're doing that, to be able to analyze, to look at whether we are identifying the right people with the questions. Next slide. Just to remind you the questions: do you have difficulty getting along with people who are close to you? Do you have difficulty dealing with people you do not know? Do you have difficulty making new friends? Difficulty maintaining friendships? Do you have difficulty forming relationships with other people? Do you have difficulty controlling your emotions when you are around people? Or do you have difficulty controlling your behavior when you are around people? You may recognize the first questions as are very much the questions in the World Health Organization's Disability Assessment Schedule, the HUDAS, but we've adapted them to fit the, to fit the Washington Group wording format. And the response options or no difficulty, some difficulty, a lot of difficulty, or cannot do it all. Next slide. This is the responses that we got from across all 4 countries. So close to you, what you see is in red are the criteria. So these people are counted in as having a disability, and those in black are those counted out. So they're not counted in as with disability and with but the ones in red are counted in as with disability. So the blue ones are those with a mental health condition, and those on the right are those without a mental health condition. And what you find is that the respondents with a mental health condition were much more likely to report difficulties across all the questions. And there was one respondent without a mental health condition who said she cannot control her emotions or her behavior. And that was around a specific example that was about not being able to stop herself from giggling in a church. So it was a very specific example. So it wasn't a more generalized difficulty. Just to also show that a number of respondents with a mental health condition, so MH is a mental health and the C is for the condition, just following the point in the chat. A number of respondents with a mental health condition actually said they had no difficulties. And that often relates to either that their symptoms are very well controlled, or they have learned a number of techniques and ways of making sure that their symptoms do not disrupt their own functioning, or their symptoms may just be very mild. For the South African controlling behavior, as Elena said, we had a different set of response options, and we recoded those to be able to include the South African data for controlling behavior. And the way we did it is if they had never had any difficulty, that was no difficulty. Rarely or sometimes was some difficulty. Most of the time, a lot of difficulty, and all the time, cannot. So that's how we recoded it. Next slide. What I'm going to do now is go through each question and look at it individually to give you a sense. So I always start off by presenting the little table, which gives the response options that were given for that question. And so that for here, do you have difficulty getting along with people who are close to you? So here, this is the same data that you find in the preceding table. I don't know why this is 86. Anyway, I think this number may be wrong here, the 86. Anyway, but it's the same data as the preceding table. So in terms of the difficulties that people had with the questions, those with a mental health condition, 11 requests out of the 106, 11 requested a repetition of the question. And the majority of those came from Kenya. And in Kenya, there was a particular situation that occurred. We aimed to test in Kiswahili. But what happened is Kiswahili is not the medium of instruction or the most common language used in Kenya. It's not people's native language. And so often people struggled with the question being asked in Kiswahili. So they often asked for repetition. So a lot of those actually result from that. So they're not really true requests for repetition. It's more about what happened in that situation. Without a mental health condition, 8 also asked for repetition of some repetition, mostly of the answer categories. And this question was the first question in both South Africa and Costa Rica, which may have meant that people were still trying to really learn the response options. The interpretations were generally consistent, and there were very few out-of-scope interpretations. Close to UK, people thought of family, of friends, people you live with, colleagues, etc. Getting along was around having conversations, communication, interacting socially in an appropriate way, feeling accepted, having fun with someone were all things that they would think about in terms of getting along. And out-of-scope interpretation by 2 respondents were when they considered only intimate relationships. So that was the only people that they considered as being close to them. So that was a bit too narrow an interpretation. Next slide. Do you have difficulty dealing with people you do not know? Again, the need for repetitions. There were 7 requests for repetitions for those with a mental health condition and 2 for those without a mental health condition. We have the same issue around the Kenya test. The interpretations, again, were generally consistent with few out-of-scope interpretations. Who are people you do not know? Strangers in the street or at parties, people in the street, people interacting with for a very specific purpose, such as in a shop, people not yet feeling that you don't yet feel comfortable with. Dealing with meant communicating, starting and having conversations, feeling comfortable with someone, ordering food or requesting a service in that very specific situation, engaging in a social context. The out-of-scope ones were largely linked to language barriers. So not, I can't deal with people I don't know because they speak a different language. Also about not wanting to betray their mental health status. And then the third one was one responding, understanding this question as being about telling a stranger to do something, which is again very narrow and limited notion of that. Next slide. So what we also did in the Kenya and Hungary cognitive tests is we added a question. After these two questions, we added another question in between saying which of these two questions reflects the difficulties that you have most the best. So what we find is, firstly, more respondents reported difficulty with dealing with people they don't know than with people close to you. And that was both people with and without a mental health condition. So if somebody reports difficulty with getting along with people who are close to you, that suggests quite a severe difficulty because so few people tend to have that difficulty. So that's something to bear in mind. And more people with mental health condition reported difficulty with people you don't know. It's clearly a barrier in trying to approach somebody that you don't know if you do have a mental health condition. Dealing with people you do not know identifies more people. So it may be more inclusive. And maybe we shouldn't use the close to you as it's a very restrictive question potentially because so few people tend to have problems. So that's just bear in mind these kind of points when we get to the proposed changes. Next slide. All right. Next question. Do you have difficulty making new friends? And again, the table gives you the results that we had from the original one. The need for repetitions, there were 5 requests for repetition by people with a mental health condition and 4 for those without. Again, the interpretations were generally consistent and there were very few out of scope interpretations. But what is making new friends? Making new friends involves connecting and communicating, engaging, being social, not being judgmental. It involves reciprocity, acknowledging each other, spending time together, sharing things in common, building trust, and supporting each other. And what types of friends or contexts were people thinking about? So people with a mental health condition often thought about other people with the same mental health condition as being people that they would make friends with. Others thought of friends in general, as well as in specific contexts, so making friends at work, and in a religious context. People in Hungary, there was an issue of friends versus acquaintances, where the term friends has a very wide set of interpretations, so that created a few problems in Hungary. And one out-of-scope interpretation given by 2 respondents was about making new friends was about giving advice or receiving advice, which again is not really the intended interpretation. Next slide. This is, do you have difficulty maintaining friendships? And here there were 6 requests for repetition, 2 requests for 4 for question repetition, and 2 requests for clarifications, and also without a mental health condition, 2 requests for question repetition. Again, similarly with the others, consistent interpretations with few out-of-scope ones. What maintaining friendships entails remaining in contact, being available, and doing things together. The type of difficulty in maintaining friendships are being rejected or avoided, lack of trust, not being valued, and also friends reacting to a person's mental health symptoms, which then makes maintaining the relationship difficult, or a relationship being one-sided may lead to difficulties in maintaining a relationship. Some of the outer scope ones were around giving advice, came up as well. Just short-term greetings, losing contact because of COVID-19 or moving away. So those were kind of geographical reasons rather than interaction reasons as such. Next slide. This one, do you have difficulty forming relationships with other people? And as quite rightly, a number of people said, well, this is quite similar to the other questions on making new friends. And that's why in Costa Rica and Hungary, we actually put this question first to separate it from the other one. Again, some needs, mental health, people with a mental health condition needed more repetitions and clarifications, etc., than those without a mental health condition. And again, very few out of scope interpretations. And for forming relationships, it's initiating an effective communication, social interaction, trusting each other, falling in love, showing an interest, understanding other person's interests and intentions. The type of friendships that people considered were long and short-term, friends and colleagues, as well as intimate relationships. The out-of-scope ones were only considering intimate or romantic relationships. Again, that very narrow interpretation. Next slide. So now we look at forming relationships versus making new friends versus maintaining friendships. Remember, this is all about trying to create a smaller group of questions. More respondents reported difficulty with forming relationships and making new friends than maintaining relationships. Maintaining relationships included out-of-scope responses of considering when people move away or due to COVID-19 restrictions, which may mean that in a big survey, we may get quite a lot of that kind of misinterpretation happening. And the making new friends caused difficulty in Hungary, yielding potentially incorrect responses as well. And we planning to test the version of this question by taking out the word new, just having making friends. But it may be a question that we decide doesn't really work that well and may get rid of it. In the last two questions, next slide. The last two questions, so the first 5 questions are really about interactions, and the last 2 are much more about controlling the emotions and behavior. So it's a slightly different domain. So again, here, the need for repetition, it was quite a high number, or in the controlling your emotions, it was quite a high number with a mental health condition that requested repetition of the question. This again, a lot of that was from Kenya. One asked for repetition of the response options and one for clarification. But there were also a number of people without a mental health condition who requested clarifications or repetitions. So again, is it something about the topic of the question, or is the wording of the question difficult? We need to look at it a little bit more, but we generally found consistent interpretations with few out of scope ones. Controlling emotions were about fitting in, pulling oneself together, appropriate emotions for the context, expressing emotions without hurting others, tolerate own emotions, and reacting calmly. And the type of emotions that people considered and across the board was overall negative emotions, with very few talking about positive ones. So overreacting, being upset, anger, nervousness, anxiety, stress, frustration, embarrassment, hysteria, sadness, and then also a couple of mentions of happiness and joy. Out of scope ones was about interpreting it as the ability to show emotions rather than controlling it, and also around mastery of skills around emotions. controlling emotions. Next question, next slide. Do you have difficulty controlling your behavior when you're around people? Again, quite a lot of needs for repetition, especially for those with a mental health condition. The interpretations, very few out of scope ones. Controlling behavior is about remaining calm and maintaining composure, not overreacting, managing reactions, withdrawing from difficult situations, behavior that's appropriate to the context, and conforming to external expectations. Types of behavior, again, were mostly negative: overreacting, being difficult, falling apart, making peace with others, patience, showing anger and shouting, crying, and rudeness. A lot of those came from people with a mental health condition. An out-of-scope interpretation was from one South African participant, where she talked about being unable to control her smoking when she's alone in her room. And that partly led to us adding when you're around other people. It's also about behavior. Others talked about behavior that cannot be controlled. For example, a nervous tic, or the side effects of medication, such as drooling. Also about listening to others and doing what they say, which again seemed a very narrow interpretation. Next question. Next slide. Okay, so many respondents, both with and without a mental health condition, reported difficulties with controlling emotions. And most respondents indicated that behavior and emotions were closely related. We actually asked the specific questions. When you thought about emotions, did you also think about behavior, and vice versa for the behavior question? And probably about 90% of them said they thought of both together. And also many of the examples of emotions, controlling emotions, included descriptions of behaviors related to that emotion. So that comes up with the proposed revision that we're going to show now. So in conclusion, next slide. The majority of interpretations were in scope. Out of scope interpretations could be tested in other cognitive tests and field testing. Respondents with a mental health condition showed difficulties because of anxiety, how people react to them and how they react to others. They struggled often with reflecting on the questions and to explain their responses. They struggled with that aspect a lot more than those without a mental health condition. They also had much more negative narratives than respondents without a mental health condition. And controlling emotions and behavior are particularly difficult for respondents with a mental health condition. All respondents with a mental health condition were in periods of low symptoms. We did not interview anybody that was in full expression of their symptoms. So somebody who was psychotic, for example, we didn't interview them. They were in a period of remission. And a lot of them talked about the impact of medication on their symptoms, and also the increased difficulties they had when they had high or severe symptoms as well. Next slide. So we ended the interview in Kenya and Hungary, asking about, well, what did you think of these questions? Did they match what you experienced, the kind of difficulties you experienced? And so these are some of the reflections from the respondents. And we only asked this of respondents with a mental health condition. What about the ease of answering the questions? So they said they weren't too difficult or too easy, but sometimes they found it difficult to recall things from past or bad experiences. So either a cognitive memory problem or that it brought up too many feelings for them. Most of the questions touched on their daily experiences and things they want to talk about, and some of the questions that seem similar. Next slide. Were the questions sensitive and were they intrusive? They said the questions were generally not intrusive, even though they were sensitive. But a couple of respondents did feel that questions on controlling emotions and behavior were a little intrusive. Other respondents found the questions on emotions and behavior interesting and useful to reflect on. And so many of them said that, it was what we needed to talk about. That there was a positive sense about these questions really being useful. Then a number of them suggested other topics that should be included in these questions and felt that they were missing in the scope of the questions. However, these are not topics that would be covered in this initial set of questions that really look at identifying basic difficulties that people have. So questions on suicide and medication use and their side effects, and questions on income, employment, and access to services, which of course all of these look at the participation side. And there was one quote which I thought just highlighted so much why we're doing this work. And it's, one person said, it's like opening a page that no one wants to open. And it's really about, everybody's so scared of mental illness and psychosocial disability. And we really need to open that book. And by developing these questions, we're starting to do that. Next one, next slide. And I know I'm about to run out of time, but so when we look at the identification by the psychosocial questions, so many more respondents with a mental health condition are identified than those without. Respondents without a mental health condition also report difficulties, but these tend to be lesser difficulties and fewer of them report them. The most difficulties are with people you don't know than those close to you. Well, I think these we've covered, and more difficulties controlling emotions than behavior. Next slide. And here, looking at the some difficulty, how many people reported some difficulty, and you can see that the orange is those without a mental health condition, and the gray are those with a mental health condition. And a lot of participants report some difficulty, but those with a mental health condition are consistently higher than a higher proportion of those report some difficulty than those without. Next slide. So when we look at how the identification of people without mental health condition, these are the profiles of responses with identified by affect only. So 20% of those with a mental health condition and 16 of those without a mental health condition. Psychosocial functioning questions only, 24% of those with and 9% of those without a mental health condition. If we use both sets, the affect questions and the psychosocial questions, you find 36% of those with and 9% of those without a mental health condition are identified. 19% of those with a mental health condition were missed by both sets of questions. So this is a false negative result. But with those without a mental health condition, 66% of them were not identified. And this is a true negative. So that's an encouraging sign that it is picking the people that we want to pick up. And the recommendation is certainly to use both sets of questions. Next slide. So how do we decide on revisions? Well, firstly, to look at questions that are less likely to show difficulties. But we also want more inclusive questions to make sure that we're picking everybody up with psychosocial disability, but hopefully not too many without. The most difficulty with the questions and the response options, which questions are requiring most repetition? Coverage, those that cover the same concept. So merging emotions and behavior and deleting making new friends, and potentially deleting making new friends and keeping forming relationships, or testing the revised version of making new friends. Next slide. So the decisions are a number of outer scope interpretations. There were very few of these, so not likely to be an important factor. Might be more about just tweaking the wording. Those that elicit broad interpretations maybe should be dropped or taken out, such as making new friends, especially in Hungary. Questions that identify most with a mental health condition, true positives, and least people without mental health condition, true negatives would be a good selection. And also questions that reflect difficulties that people with a psychosocial disability feel are the most important ones. Next slide. Actually, I'm going to skip that because this is how many questions that it take. I'm not sure it's that relevant here. So what are we going to do? We're going to revise it. So we're going to merge controlling emotions and behavior into a single question. Do you have difficulty in controlling your emotions or behavior when you are around other people? Delete making new friends, or test the revised version, which will be, do you have difficulty making friends? Deleting with other people from forming relationships that seem to create some problems. So revise it to, do you have difficulty forming relationships? Next slide. So as Elena said, now it's about conducting some more cognitive testing studies and completing this comparative analysis, revising the sets, and conducting field testing. And please, 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 any people who could put these questions on an existing survey, that would be really welcome as a potential place to do a field test. And then eventually draft a manual to support the correct implementation of the question set and the analysis, interpretation, and reporting. And the next slide, the last one, is just slides. Thank you to all. And there's, yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's all. And our contact details. But go back, and now we're going to have the poll. And I see there are lots of things in the chat. I'll try and write responses. Elena and I will try and write responses to some of the comments in the chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Margie. We have gone ahead and released the poll. You should see on your screen the poll for this particular session, which has 3 questions. So again, resize your poll window if you are not seeing all of those questions, and you can also expand it and then scroll down. And we will leave that open for about 2 minutes, Margie, if you have some other final thoughts while people are responding.
Okay, the issue around UNICEF is also working on a mental health model. I don't know much about it, but I think, and Claudia maybe can respond to this. I think this is more looking at symptoms than the kind of activity limitations or functioning that the questions that we have are looking at. But it will be useful to do a more thorough review of that. I'm just trying to think. Okay, the age cutoff was determined, was for 18, as Elena said. The child functioning module already has questions up to age 17 on psychosocial functioning. So we did it for 18 years and above. The questions are for adults. You could probably use them from about 15 years of age, but we haven't tested them from that age. Okay, we would like to look at proxy interviewing. We haven't got to there as well. I think that would be one of the next stages, would be to look at proxy respondents. And if anybody were interested in working with us on testing some proxy, doing some cognitive testing with proxy respondents, that would be really very useful. But that still remains as an aim. I get confused with all the questions with I think I've probably picked up most of them Were there any specific instructions for the interviewers about each question when the interviewers requested additional explanation, examples, or indicated that they did not understand the questions? In the training, we spoke about it, but for each question, the interviewer had to rate, did the respondent ask for clarification? Did the respondent ask for the question to be repeated, or the response options? Did they have difficulty using the response options? So, I mean, the idea was not to then explain the question to them. That wouldn't have been done. It was more about noting whether they had difficulties or not. The interviewer does not, okay. Elena provided a response on that. All right, there's a lot of
I'm not seeing any new responses to the poll. Oh, and of course, as soon as I said that, there was one more. So let's wrap up this poll in about 30 seconds, and then we will switch over to session 3. But Margie and Elena, thank you so much. The body of work that you have done is remarkable, admirable, and also very much appreciated. And I'm happy to see that there are some yes responses to the question of would you like a follow-up? So that's wonderful.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay, we'll end the poll there, and I will turn the floor over to Jennifer, who is going to introduce our 3rd session for the day.
There we go. Thanks, Julie. I guess this is also our last session for today. It is really my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Sarah Malinlou, with GIZ in Germany. She is the team lead and secretariat of the Global Disability Summit team at GIZ, and a supporter of the Washington Group. As I mentioned, she is our primary contact at GIZ in working on issues related to Washington Group work, and instrumental in providing the financial assistance that we have received. At many of our steering committee meetings, questions have come up about the summit, and there's a lot of interest on the part of our members about the summit, and they were asking questions that we couldn't answer. So we thought it would be very useful for us to hear directly from Sarah about the plans for the summit that is coming up next April. So I will turn the floor over to you, Sarah. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and good to see you again. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for inviting me to your annual meeting. It's a pleasure to be here. So I learned you would like to get an update on the Global Disability Summit 2025. It's going to be taking place in Berlin on the 2nd and 3rd of April. It's going to be in presence, but there will be also an option for online attendance, maybe not participation, not interactive, but at least streaming will be made possible for the main stage events. You can switch to the next slide. So the next Global Disability Summit will be hosted by Germany, the government of Germany, the government of Jordan, and the International Disability Alliance, together as 3 co-hosts. It will be the 3rd Global Disability Summit. Next slide. So the first GDS took place in 2018 in London, co-hosted by the government of the UK, Kenya, and IDA. IDA is the permanent co-host, so they were involved in all three GDSs. The second GDS took place in 2022 during COVID, so it was only virtually held, but the governments of Norway and Ghana were the co-hosts together with IDA. And now it's going to be the third GDS in 2025 in Berlin, as I said, and hosted by Germany, Jordan, and IDA. We can move to the next slide for the context and the goals. So maybe most of you know that the GDS aims to foster or speed up the implementation of the UNCRPD. The first GDS in 2018 and the second were kind of how can I say it, pilots trying out how this mechanism can increase the implementation of the CRPD and how persons with disabilities can be the focus can be more on persons with disabilities and their rights. And the objective of all three GDSs is to make disability inclusion a global priority and ensure that all individuals with disabilities can fully participate in society. I mean, we all know that the UNCRPD was ratified by many governments, but the lived reality of persons with disabilities, as you know from your work, is still far from being fully inclusive. So that's the aim of the GDS. We can move to the next slide and then I can say a bit more about how we want to achieve this. So the GDS is working at the intersection of disability inclusion, development cooperation and humanitarian action and national ownership. So it's really about closing the gap between the lived reality of persons with disabilities in the global south and in the global north. I think it makes a huge difference whether a person with a disability lives in a country like Sudan or whether this person lives in a country like Germany or France. So this is the aim to close the gap and to make disability inclusion also move it a step forward in partner countries. I don't want to say that in European or northern countries disability inclusion is already fully achieved. We also still have a long way to go, but the GDS focuses on the advancement of disability inclusion in partner countries. And as you can see, one of our key messages is using disability data and evidence. So that's where the Washington Group is an important strategic partner. And we can move to the next slide. I think most of you are interested which role the topic of data is playing in the GDS. So as you just saw, it's one of our key messages that the need for data is relevant to achieve system change. It's also considered as a cross-cutting theme, so it should play a role in all the thematic sessions. We are planning to have a disability data forum. We are not yet sure whether it's going to be on 3rd of April, so the second day of the GDS, or maybe it's going to be on the day before the GDS. So on 1st of April, there's going to be a civil society forum, and maybe in parallel, we could hold a disability data forum, which is supposed to last around half a day, where we would really like to bring together the relevant stakeholders in this area so that they can exchange on a more detailed level than is possible within the main program. And we are hoping to launch a few data products during this Disability Data Forum and also during the main GDS, which is one, the Disability Data Hub from the World Bank. Another one is the regional report on Africa, which is currently being developed by the Washington Group, by the regional Washington groups. And then we also expect to have the Global Disability Inclusion Report, which is equivalent to the World Report on Disabilities, which was launched in 2011, and now we're planning to come up with an updated report. And the question to you is, what else? What are we missing? Are there any other relevant disability inclusion data products or solutions that we should present at this Disability Data Forum? And I'm happy to see your comments in the chat, or you can unmute your microphone. I don't know if that's possible, but feel free to comment to me, or you can also approach me directly via email. And then the other question that's maybe of importance to you is, how can you get involved in the GDS 2025? So there's the commitments process that has been a central aspect of all three GDSs. I think the last GDS brought together more than 1,000 commitments from governments, from multilaterals, but also from civil society. The commitments portal is open. The link you can see here in the in the presentation, and I'm sure you're going to get the presentation afterwards. Another way of getting involved in the GDS is that we want to present good practices. So how can disability inclusion be achieved, to really show to the participants that disability inclusion can be easy. It's not rocket science, or it's something that is too hard to achieve, but it's something that can be done. And therefore we are planning to present good practices of disability inclusion during our panel sessions in the main program. So if you have good practices, how in your countries, in your system, disability inclusion was advanced or was achieved, then let me know about it, and I try to make sure it's going to be included. We are also planning to have a declaration, or a final document for the GDS. And for now, the plan is to have a strong message in this document, which means 15 for the 15. This entails that 15% of development cooperation should be directed towards persons with disabilities, because they are 15% of the world's population. I know the current number is 16%, but 15 was kind of catchier and related to other campaigns around disability inclusion. So we decided to stick with 15, but yeah, current numbers are a bit higher. Then we have side events planned, so you can apply to be the host for a side event. The application process will start soon, within October still. If you are interested to know more about it, I would advise you to visit the GDS website. It's also included in this presentation here. You can find it easily, and there you can subscribe for a newsletter, and the newsletter will let you know once the application process for site events is open, once the registration process is open. Everything you need to know around the GDS is communicated via the newsletter. And then we have, of course, an exhibition hall. It's a very big venue with different halls, and one of the halls is going to be dedicated to thematic booths, to presentations of assistive technologies. For example, we're planning to maybe have an inclusive classroom, so that people can really experience inclusive aspects of life. So if you are interested, there's also going to be an application process for this. Invitation and registration, we are currently in the process of inviting around 36 heads of state from the Chancellor of Germany and the King of Jordan. They are sending out the invitations. Then we are planning to invite around 180 countries on ministry level. And then, of course, the multilateral organizations that are of interest, some private sector institutions and civil society will be invited. However, there's also an open registration process. So on the GDS website, you will find also in the coming weeks, the registration link will be open. So you can register, and then there's a process of checking process happening, and once you've been accepted, you can proceed with your planning to travel to Berlin. Next slide. Only I think 2 or 3 more slides. I can hurry up a bit so that we have time for questions. So important aspects to achieve this change for disability inclusion is, of course, meaningful participation of OPDs. They play a big role in the GDS. We are also aiming for multi-stakeholder commitments. So in the past, the commitments were usually from one single actor, but we think multi-stakeholder commitments can create greater impact. And we are also aiming to have a stronger role for private sector. So the private sector involvement in the last 2 GDSs was very low, but we think without private sector, we cannot achieve real change for persons with disabilities. Next slide. I think the drivers for change for the GDS 2025, I mean, some of them have been mentioned already. I think most of them have been mentioned. Maybe one that needs to be mentioned is number 5 is a global initiative on inclusive and resilient cities in situations of crisis. This is a German commitment, which is going to be coordinated by UNPRPD, so the Partnership for the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which is a strong partner in the GDS process. And then I think the last slide you can show, which gives us an idea about the main topics of the GDS. So we did consultations with this civil society, mainly with OPDs, and they named their most important topics or their priority topics. And from these, we came up with 4 pillars, which pillar 1 is non-discrimination, equality, and participation, including legal capacity, deinstitutionalization, reasonable accommodation. Pillar 2 is accessibility, assistive technology, accessible infrastructures, inclusion in digital information and communication. Number 3 is situations of crisis and conflict, which affect persons with disabilities stronger than persons without disabilities. And part of this is inclusive climate action, inclusive humanitarian action, and situations of armed conflict, flight, and migration. And then the last pillar is social and economic rights, with inclusive education, inclusive employment, social protection, health equity, and sexual and reproductive rights. And you can see below the gray bar are the overarching topics. So empowerment of OPDs, gender equality and intersectionality, prioritization of underrepresented groups with disabilities, and reliable and disaggregated data, which is again relevant for you. That's it. I'm happy to receive your questions or comments. I can have a look in the chat. It's in French, Spanish, and Arabic, which but maybe those were questions to Marguerite, right?
I think we're getting the translation of the questions that are coming up, and I didn't see any particularly on this presentation, but let me just mention a couple of things, Sarah. Thank you very much for agreeing to chat with us today. It has been a major topic of conversation, particularly around attendance and how that would work. And I guess a lot of our members are wondering if they can become part of their country delegation or if they have to go as individuals, as it complicates things, I guess, within the work situation. But it sounded to me, and please correct me, that yeah, you can register as an individual, but there will be invitations out at the ministry level, and so there might be, a country might send a whole delegation, and it would be nice if data people were included on that.
Exactly. So the invitations on ministry level are channeled through the embassies, and we advise them that ministries of planning and ministries of social affairs should be invited because they are the ones concerned with this nexus of development, cooperation, and disability inclusion. So yeah, happy for any delegation to be welcomed with data people included. That would be great. Also, especially for the Disability Data Forum. And but if someone doesn't succeed to be part of a delegation, you can still register as individuals on the registration portal.
And I assume doing that sooner rather than later is good because you probably do have a maximum on the number of people.
Yeah, 3,000 people can fit in the venue, but we do need to take personal assistance into account, so it might be
Actually,
not the whole space for participants.
you did just see a question in the chat which asked about how about NSOs? Can you invite them specifically, I guess, rather than through the ministries?
I can ask our ministry. I mean, the Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development is in the lead for the GDS preparations, and they're also the ones inviting. But I can ask them to
Would be great.
put NSOs. All countries, all partner countries in the global south should be on the list, or what would be the proposal?
However you can do, I think everyone is so interested in this that they would all like their NSOs to be
Okay.
invited because, practically speaking, often the NSO would not be thought of if such an invitation came in because it
Yeah.
doesn't have data in the title. And so they may not, even with the best of intentions, might not think about that there might be a role for the NSO. Otherwise, people kind of have to work from the bottom up and try to find
Their way. Yeah.
yeah, and so
Okay.
but it's good to it's good for our members to know that this is happening, and maybe after the meeting, we could maybe do a brief note to them that they can share with their NSO director, so the NSO director can know to ask to be invited or to be part of the delegation. There had been a request that maybe we could write a letter, but we can't write the letter because it's not our meeting, but we may be able to give them information that, and we can always check with you about whether the wording is appropriate, to share with their NSO so they could follow their thing back.
Great idea. Yeah, I mean, definitely at the GDS 25, we are aiming to participants also outside the disability inclusion bubble because, I mean, preaching to the converted doesn't always bring the change. So definitely data people would be great to have them there.
Do you have a day, this is the other question, on when registration will open?
Well, we do have an event agency, and they promised to us that it's going to open next week, but they didn't tell us the day. So probably towards the end of the week. Usually they are delayed a bit. So.
Of course. Okay, but it's good to know it's going to be relatively soon rather than a month or two. So if you're interested, probably a good idea to check the website next week, maybe on
Mhm.
Wednesday or Thursday. Does that make sense? Okay. I just want to, if there are no other, I think the other is a
I have a question, if you don't mind, Jennifer.
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Sarah, are there any side events that are already on your list as those that will be included? Or, what can you tell us about what the plans are there? Or are you in a situation where there's no expectation and no agenda yet, you're going to wait to see what comes in?
So for the main program, the co-hosts are going to decide on the thematic focus of the session. So
Yeah.
at the moment we have around 8 themes we want to see on the main program, and there's going to be one co-host as a lead, and of course stakeholders, strategic relevant stakeholders to be involved. For the side events, we are still open. I think the call for side events is also going to be published next week.
Okay.
There are going to be a few criteria, obviously, like involvement of OPDs or persons with disabilities, and of course we're going to look at geographical representation and a mix of topics, the usual selection process, but we haven't yet any earmarked side events, unless you would consider the Disability Data Forum as a side event. I mean, it's kind of a side event, but it's a longer side event of half a day. But all the rest is still open. And I always think it's advisable to submit a side event proposal where several partners are involved, because then the chances are usually higher that it gets accepted.
There are a couple of questions that are coming in. The first of all, is there a sponsorship opportunity for those who register? Is there any mechanism to receive or apply for support? And then the other question was, can you say more about the Global Disability Inclusion Report and the Disability, I guess, Data Hub? These were things on one of the slides.
So regarding the funding mechanisms, there is an opportunity for funding for OPD members to the International Disability Alliance. They're also going to announce this process soon, and then the selection process is, I think, going to be finalized by November, December. There's another funding opportunity through the Disability Rights Fund for individuals with disabilities, but there is no official funding mechanism for individuals without disabilities, let's put it like this. But we strongly advise to reach out to your governments, to the stakeholders that are active in your country, and ask them whether funding is possible at a very early stage. I think the chances are higher to get this instead of waiting for too long and then to ask with a short notice. Regarding the Global Disability Inclusion Report, this is a process coordinated by UNICEF and IDA. It was initially, we had the plan to come up with the World Report on Disabilities #2, because 2011 is a long time ago, and there was quite some criticism regarding the last report, and involvement of OPDs and Global South, and applying the medical model and all this. So we wanted to come up with a new version, but we failed to come up with a full World Report too, because the whole vetting process between the different UN organizations would take too long. So we decided to have the Global Disability Inclusion Report covers more or less all of the topics we wanted to cover with the World Report, but it's not going to be a vetted report. It's going to have, so it's kind of yeah, how can I call it? So it's not undergoing the whole vetting process with the UN agencies. It's probably maybe only UNICEF and IDA putting their logo on it. But the plan is still, with more time and more funding, to aim for a full World Report, second World Report on disabilities
Right.
after the
Can I
GDS.
add a related question, Sarah? Do you know what the database is going to be for that report?
Ooh, I mean, I've been working together with them, but I don't exactly know which database they're using. It's Alex Code is the project
Mhm.
manager for it,
Yeah.
so we would need to ask him directly. They haven't. Now I'm lacking the English word. Um, they didn't produce new data, so they looked into the existing reports and used the existing data. I think they're also in close contact with Sophie Mitra, with the World Bank for their data. And I also advised them to get in touch with you, with the Washington Group, for the regional African data, but I'm not sure whether maybe the lack of time prevented it.
We've had some email exchanges, but we have not actually
Okay.
been able to meet. So maybe we'll reach out again to Alex and see.
Yeah, please do. I think he's very much under pressure because the timeline is very short. But
Yes.
if you remind him that there's data available for the African region, I think he'd be happy to include it.
I think, Julie, you had another question, which I'm blanking on, but
Actually, those were the two.
Oh,
Sarah
okay.
did address both of them. Thank you so much. Those came in via email. Thank you.
yeah, there are a few other things in the chat which are individual organizations asking that their NSO be invited. We'll pass those on
Okay.
to.
Great.
But I think it's just reflects the interest by this community being more involved in the summit, which is great. The only other thing I wanted to mention was to just let our members know that for all of the other summits, the Washington Group had made commitments included, and we have not looked at that yet, and we will look at it. But because of the nature of our organization, our commitments cannot be very specific. And of course, we don't have any money, so we can't commit to 15% of anything, 15% of zero, but we're good with that, but it's not very useful. So we'll take a look. Our commitment, and if anyone is interested, we certainly can make them available, but they have been very general that we will support the best practices for the collection, analysis, and dissemination of disability data, something along those lines. So it tends to be very generic. And I thought that this year there was really a push for very specific things that can be tracked. When we put in our tracking, we basically report on our activities, but it's more retrospective than it is prospective because we don't always know what we're going to be doing over the year. So we can touch base with you, Sarah, about that, as you know, how the best for an organization like us to make our commitment when we are in kind of a unique situation.
Yeah, I mean, a commitment doesn't always have to be financial commitment. So the symbolic character is important. So I'm happy to discuss with you.
Okay, how best we can do that, because we certainly do want to be supportive as we
Great.
can.
Thank you so much.
And I think, oh, there's another one. Let's see. Oh, this was for not for you, for the previous one. Well, thank you again for everything you have
Thank you very
done
much.
as a partner and a colleague, and for coming today. We hope it was useful for you too to find out what we've been doing in space. And I think very encouraging that there is so much interest in the summit, and hopefully post summit. lots of wonderful things are said at the summit, but as you said, sometimes after the summit is when you have to really do the hard work to make it happen.
That long-term commitment. Yeah, definitely. But thank you very much for having me, and looking forward to seeing you all in Berlin, whoever will make it there.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right, well, this brings us to the end of today's meeting. Thank you all for attending. We actually maintained very good attendance throughout the morning. I hope the new format with the 15-minute break was useful. It did require that we kind of make some of the sessions shorter, but hopefully in the end result, it was a useful addition to how we go. As always, we really do appreciate any feedback you can provide about the meeting itself and what you'd like to be done differently. They said, you know, things are great, virtual meetings, we get a lot more people than we normally would get, but we do not have the level of interaction that we used to get when we met in person. And so I know that I can speak for the Secretariat that sometimes we feel like we're in a bit of a bubble and we don't really know what membership would like us to be doing and wants to see and where they want to put their emphasis. And so we really encourage you to let us know. We can't always respond to requests given our bandwidth, but we would do our best. Now, looking forward to the next couple of days, I want to remind you that tomorrow we have the regional breakout rooms as the last session. There are some questions for you to deal with, but it is really your time. And so you can use the time however you want and however is most useful for you. But if you can spend even just a few minutes responding to some of the major questions that we have, it would be useful. But you can also do that later if you have other things that you really want to deal with. We never know how many people will be available for these groups. So if it turns out your group is too small, I think you can move groups. Feel free to join another one. And there is kind of a non-affiliated group, like for the US, where we don't really have a regional group. But I believe there is a group for Europe this year, so that hopefully our European colleagues can go to that. We will have on the last morning, we'll hear report backs from those groups. So remember, you need a rapporteur and you need someone who's going to report back on the major activities in your breakout. We do hope you'll spend a little time on the analytic reports. We really want to make a proposal to Sarah and the others at GIZ that our country-specific reports be included in that side event, special day-to-day. Sarah mentioned the World Bank hub, but that is a top-down thing. That's taking data and putting it in a hub as opposed to what countries are producing for themselves and what does it look like at the country level. And so we think those two things would be very nice and complementary, but we need to get those reports in a format, a way that we can present them at the summit, at that special day or that breakout. And as there were a lot of comments for Margie and Elena's presentation, thank you very much for that. As Julie said, you've done a huge amount of work and we're very appreciative of it. But want you to think about for that session and for the sessions that are going to come up tomorrow and Thursday, what are the next steps? Now, they have asked for people to join them in cognitive testing, but what are the next steps for us as a group? Do you want to have webinar on some of the issues that were raised in their presentation? For example, their analysis of looking at those with mental health conditions versus those without, and how do the questions work. But the questions really aren't designed to identify mental health conditions. What is that intersection and how does the use of medications interact with that? For other things, it may not be as much of an issue. Do we get questions with the use of meds, without the use of meds? What is feasible? So is that something that you would like a webinar to be developed that we can go into more detail on that particular issue or any other issue that was raised. What is the implication of using proxies for these kinds of questions? Can you get good proxy data? How would we know? So I think encourage you to think about that. And for every other of the sessions that are going to happen tomorrow and the next day, because I'll give you a heads up, at the end, we will ask you about webinars. It's the best way that we can keep in contact with membership throughout the year, other than through the work groups, but not everyone is on a work group. So we'd like to do more on the webinars. We want to make sure they're going to be useful and wanted. The webinars for the development of the country reports were very well attended, and we got good feedback on those. So we'd like to build on that. But again, we need your input. So be prepared at the end to let us know what you would like webinars on. And I think someone just suggested one. So thank you very, very much. Please, everybody, follow the guidance of our colleague here who put her webinar suggestion in about mental health questions, and we capture them. So I will close the meeting now. Wish you all a good day, evening, night. And again, thank you for joining us. And I look forward to tomorrow's meeting and more interaction. So thank you very much and be well.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.